Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Katie Kessner. I am the primary host of the Dear Katie podcast, and we are so delighted to have you take this journey with us on our weekly podcast episodes. I just want to remind everyone to do great self-care. Thriving is part of the purpose of this podcast, and we definitely want you to take a break at any time. Warm bath, fresh air, walk a dog, have a bite of chocolate, whatever you need to do good care for yourself. Just as a reintroduction, if you're not familiar with me, I am the woman who was on the cover of Time magazine at age 18 as the first in history to speak out nationally and publicly as the victim of date rape. And HBO made a film about me, and I went on to become the executive director of the Take Back the Night Foundation. We are the oldest, largest global movement on sexual violence in all forms for all people in the world. So we encourage you to visit our website for lots more information. So I'm going to turn it over to our hosts and our guests for today. Hi, everyone. This is Katie Kessner, and welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. We are so delighted to have you continue on this healing journey, all of us together as listeners, and kind of going through each and every episode, finding something in each one that can take us a little farther along the journey. It's always so important that we do good self-care. If at any point, push pause, take a breath, get some fresh air. I always say eat chocolate. Have a cup of coffee, whatever is going to work for you if you get activated, triggered by anything we discussed today. So I am so delighted to share with you a very interesting guest. I think you're going to find the book and his own life story very, very interesting. So I'll introduce John Miller. John Miller is the CEO of J.R. Miller Enterprises, overseeing a diverse portfolio in real estate, private companies, public securities, agriculture, and aquaculture. He retired as CEO of National Beef Packing Company in 2009, where he grew the company from $500 million to over $7 billion in sales. John holds a BS in history from Utah State University and an honorary doctorate in agribusiness from the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. He resides in Salt Lake City, Utah, with his wife, Nataliya, and is a devoted father and grandfather. His family's experience is chronicled in the newly released book, Hometown Betrayal, a tragic story of secrecy and sexual abuse in Mormon Country, which I assume is all of Utah. I'm not sure, but we'll learn more, which shares their fight for justice for his late ex-wife, Valarie Clark Miller, and raises awareness about sexual violence and its generational impact. So welcome, John. My goodness. And I only got to read a tiny bit to our audience about all the different ways you have held positions in all kinds of businesses. But my goodness, what a life you've lived so far.
Well, thanks, Katie, and thank you for having me on the podcast today. I'm excited to be here and to share a few of my experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we were chatting just before we started recording, but you were about to tell me, so you grew up in Utah, you were born there and raised there?
I grew up in northern Utah in a little town called Hiram, Utah, in Cache County, which is the northern part of the state.
Okay.
And I lived there for the first 30 years of my life and then ended up in Omaha, Nebraska, and then in Kansas City for many years. And a number of years ago, moved back to Park City, Utah and Salt Lake. And I've been principally here since about 1990.
Okay. So that and I guess maybe out of all the different things you've done with your career life, can you highlight any one or two that might particularly relate to the book you wrote? Is there anything that stands out that really was, I guess, either helpful or eye-opening that you look back upon now and think, wow, that was an important part of my life I didn't even realize until all these other things were happening?
That's a really good question, and it's a little difficult, but let me take a stab at that.
Yeah,
I
try. I mean, it's like whatever stands out. When we have lived a long life, there's so many things we go through, and sometimes we have a different perspective when other additional factors come into play. So I'm just curious. You're one of the guests we've had that has just done so many, many different things that I think that might be an interesting question for you.
well, thank you for the question. This has been a 50-year journey. I'm 72 in another week, but it's really been a 50-year journey from the first day that I met Valarie Clark. And I think what's interesting is my perceptions today and my feelings today, of course, have changed over the years. And when my son came to me 4 years ago and said, and Valarie has been gone for 7 years now, but when my son Ryan came to me 4 years ago and said, I think we should hire a forensic firm and go back and really try to understand more about what happened to Mom.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh my gosh, Ryan, I didn't really want to do it because I'd kind of closed emotionally that chapter many years ago, but out of respect for him and the love for the other children, I said, well, let's do it. And so it's interesting because in 1990, when the first, be back up just a minute. In 1985 is when I discovered, and Valarie really discovered, about the sexual abuse and trauma that she had experienced as a young girl and a teenager. And we were married for almost 10 years before she started having recall, and I had no idea about this. I knew that there was some emotional issues, but I didn't know what was the cause of them. So,
hey, John, I have a question. So you were married. Let me just summarize what I heard. So
okay.
you guys must have gotten married in 75.
Exactly.
Okay, and then in 85 is when all these memories started flooding back for Valarie's about her own past as a child. May I just ask, had she had children by then with you?
Yes, she had 3 children. The memories really were triggered by an accident that my 6-year-old daughter was in, where she was struck by an automobile and
Okay.
was in a coma for 5 months.
Oh my
Kind of
goodness.
teetered between life and death, and that trauma in and of itself, the doctors later explained to us that was probably what triggered the memories to begin to flood forward.
Okay, I think that is so completely accurate. I mean, I'm sure you already decided, John, but just for your own, I think you know a little bit about me, but I'll
I
reshare
do
it
a
for
little bit. Thank
you.
you.
And I was on the cover of Time magazine at age 18 after my rape by a fellow student at William and Mary, and I was. It was 1991, June 3rd, that the cover came out, but my assault happened in the fall. And I've spent, I'm 20 years younger than you, but I've spent 34 years now of my life since I was 18 working really hard on this issue and directing Take Back the Night and speaking and traveling all over the country. I've been to Utah State to speak, believe it or not, and University of Utah. I've been to Brigham Young and many times out to Utah. So where I head with this is back to the reason why I asked about your wife having children at that point. That sometimes, it's like our brain has tucked trauma away.
Mm-hmm.
And then it takes something like what happened with your 6-year-old daughter at that point to unlock that door that was so tightly closed. So it makes a lot of sense. And I find it fascinating how many people have the same experience of being able to lock up childhood trauma, and really just try and it's almost like it didn't happen. And then all of a sudden it comes flooding back in. So I completely understand, and now it makes total sense. So So the daughter is in the coma, and then so what happens? My goodness, I can only imagine how hard it must have been for you. Did she tell you? Like, so what happened?
Well, thank you for sharing just what you did, and it's so true. These events open a door that unlocks it's good, but it's kind of like a Pandora's box. It just has so many tentacles. But so she started having anxiety attacks, and she would be frightened at night. She would go on drives and say that she would be home in an hour or two, and then late in the evening she'd call and say, well, I'm on my way home. And she just had these terrible anxiety attacks, and eventually she ended up in a hospital in Logan, Utah.
Okay.
In the psychiatric ward, and a psychiatrist there started working with her, and he was able to uncover an initial attack by a cousin to her father, and a highway patrolman, and a third person who witnessed it. Mm-hmm. And it was very, very difficult for her to extract these feelings. And that's about all we knew in 1985. But it was enough for us to try to, find out what happened. And of course, we knew who the perpetrators were. And eventually, we moved to Omaha in 1987, and she began to work with a psychiatrist there who recommended that she enter the Menninger Clinic, which was in Topeka, Kansas, as a patient, which was an in-house patient. While she was there, she began working with a psychologist there that was brilliant. And he began piece by piece over the period of a year that she spent there to unravel what had happened and the impact that it had. And I remember once asking him, how do you know when someone is telling you the truth and when they're not? And he said, you never know for sure, but he said, in Valerie's case and in most sexual abuse cases, it's very, very difficult for the patients to talk about, and he said there's a different emotion. And those that may not be telling the truth, which are very few, we know, don't experience this trauma and emotional pain of extracting these terrible experiences. And in Valerie's case, they were horrific. It was violence, it was beatings, it was rape over 2 years with the highway patrolman and the neighbor, the cousin.
Oh, wow. Hi, this is Katie Kessner, and I wanted to remind all of our listeners about the free National Sexual Assault Legal Hotline. We at Take Back the Night have assembled an incredible team of attorneys, trauma-informed, who truly believe survivors and want to support their journeys in healing and finding justice. The Get Justice Hotline is 567-SHATTER, or feel free to fill out a form on the Take Back the Night website, share your story, let the attorneys know what's going on, and they will get back to you as soon as possible with all of your legal options. That is a service we are delighted to provide through Take Back the Night.
And so it took quite a while. And when we moved back from Omaha to Utah, we went to the state of Utah and filed a complaint. I'll stop there and see if you've got any questions. But
it was a lot. And I think your question is so interesting about how do you know someone's telling the truth? And I think it's, I'm sure people want to deny, and it might have even been hard for you, John, to hear your wife had been through so much. And was there ever a point where you were like, oh my gosh, this can't be true. This is so much. Did you ever feel overwhelmed and like, how can someone have been through all this?
Well, I certainly felt overwhelmed, but originally it answered a lot of questions about her mental state and her emotional condition. And so originally it was a relief, and I did believe her, and I never really doubted her. And there were times when I was certainly overwhelmed when we went to the state of Utah and filed a complaint. And fortunately, through this entire time, from the time we were married until many years later, I kept a journal. And so I'd record my feelings and what happened. And we went in and filed this complaint with the internal affairs officer at the Department of Public Safety, which housed the Highway Patrol as one of their divisions. And he assured me that they would get into this and that this was a very serious allegation and that they would do a thorough investigation. And I came home that night and I wrote in my journal, they're going to cover this up. And that's exactly what they did. They called me about 2 or 3 weeks later, and the investigator said he was going to Omaha to talk with, in Kansas, to talk to her psychologist and psychiatrist. That turned out to be a lie. They asked Valarie to take a lie detectors test, and then a few days later called me and said that the highway patrolman had taken one and he had passed with flying colors, and now it was really important for her to do this. And I questioned that. We ended up going up to Seattle, Washington, and met with an expert polygrapher and that dealt with sexual abuse victims and polygraphs. And he said, you can't test her. She's not testable. And so we went back to the investigator, the internal affairs officer, and shared this with him. And he said, well, there's nothing more we can do. And we had an attorney, and he told the investigator, the internal affairs officer told our attorney that he had called and talked to the psychologist at the Menninger Clinic, and the psychologist had told him that she couldn't be believed. She was schizophrenic, and that she was she wasn't being truthful. And so I didn't know about that part until 20 some years later. But so, I mean, they did a pretty thorough job, and I didn't have any experience dealing with, a big state department like that. And we kind of felt like it was the end of the line.
Right. And then what year was this now?
This was in 1990.
90, that you started filing all the charges.
We made a claim, or went to them and filed a complaint against this particular highway patrolman. Okay.
And maybe I could ask one more thing. So these different experiences that Valarie had, how did she come in contact with the highway patrolman? Was he a family member, a family friend? And how old was she at the time when these things were happening?
She was between 13 and 14.
Mm-hmm.
She was raised in a little community of 500 people.
Mm-hmm.
And the house across the street was where her father's first cousin lived. And the policeman was at one time he was actually the local policeman for the little community. And so he was well known. Everybody in a little town like this, and it was a little Mormon community where people knew everybody, and most people attended church, including both of the abusers.
Mm-hmm.
And so everyone was well acquainted with these two individuals.
Okay. Now that makes more sense. Thanks for going back and explaining that. Another question I had was, how did you meet your wife?
Well, I was a junior in high school, and a mutual friend said, I just have to introduce you to a girl that I know. She was a sophomore, Valarie, and I was a junior. And so he introduced us, and I was just kind of awestruck how beautiful she was, and very, very bright. But she had a boyfriend at the time who was the quarterback of the football team, and I didn't give it much more thought that, well, I just better wait till he leaves. And so we didn't start dating until I was a senior near Christmas time, and a year and a half later. But she was a remarkable girl. She was an athlete. She was whip smart, straight A's, had a scholarship to BYU and Utah State in track, student body officer, just an outstanding person, deeply
Wonderful.
spiritual.
Did you, so you two were in the same high school, and so I assume that the high school, you were in the same high school.
Correct. Yes, I should have said that.
Yeah. And then, but you must have lived in a different town, and the high school had her town and your town feeding
Correct.
into it?
We attended a county high school, and all the kids from this county went to a high school, which was Skyview High School, and the other high school in the county was in Logan, and that was Logan High School. There were only two high schools at the time.
Gotcha. Okay. Then so now I got the history straight.
Okay.
John, and so now we file the charges. You get nowhere in 90, but then I think you mentioned the Omaha, Nebraska. That was not until 97.
No, it was actually, we moved it to Omaha from Logan in 1987 until 1991.
Okay.
And so it was really when we were in Omaha, and she was at the Miniger Clinic in 1980. She was there all of 1989. Mm-hmm. That we fully understood the depth and the tragedy that, I mean, one abuse is terrible, but she was abused for over 2 years by these two guys, and was suffering deeply from post-traumatic stress disorder. And this wonderful psychologist that we worked with, who later became their main psychologist for the entire clinic, which was a very large clinic, he was terrific. And he really unraveled what had happened. And it was, at the end, when it finally ended, the highway patrolman tried to murder her by drowning her in a nearby lake. He once took their family dog when they were on a vacation, and when she came back, when they would coerce her into meeting with them with threats that they would kill her brother and sister if she didn't, they had this family dog tied behind an old cabin and took her out and back and shot the dog in front of her.
Oh, my goodness.
They were brutal and violent. And, one of the emotions that I obviously felt was first sadness and for my wife, but also tremendous anger. I was so angry. I just wanted to take the law into my own hands, so to speak. But it was a very difficult time for her and for our entire family.
Right. Oh my goodness. So I guess, when she's going through all of this, what kinds of things did you find that she either used as coping or were helpful or really problematic? Anything? I mean, our listeners, they're from all walks of life, John. So I think anything to help them, kind of connect with your late wife and what she was going through would be really helpful. Just so they can kind of see themselves and her in some, parallel universe, if you will. So what kinds of things were you seeing, or do you think she was going through as she was trying to cope with all the trauma?
Well, it was complicated because right after Annie, our firstborn that was injured in the automobile accident, Valarie was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So this obviously complicated her life and the family, and the suffering that she went through was painful from the attacks of MS that she had. So this compounded the entire problem, and our fourth born was born shortly after, about a year after my firstborn's accident. So, we were busy. She had 4 little children, and I was, involved in my work, and we were recuperating her, helping my oldest daughter to recuperate. So, which took a lot of time, and she had to basically learn how to function all over again. So, unfortunately, Valarie turned to prescription drugs. And it was painful to see this happen, and it complicated our relationship and our marriage and so forth. But we just kind of held on and tried to do the best we could. And one of the reasons we actually wrote this book is to bring to light the generational impact of sexual abuse. And in Valarie's case, and in our case as a family, it had a huge impact because the children were affected by Valarie's illness and the aftermath of what she'd suffered. So it was tough going for everybody.
Right, I can imagine. Hi, everybody. It's Katie Kessler. Just a quick interruption. We want you to know that there is an entire shop full of cool merch on the Take Back the Night website to support your own healing journey, that of someone you care about. There are T-shirts, there's bracelets, there's glow-in-the-dark stuff. There's all kinds of unique special edition from our artist series as well. So please take a look. If it's a holiday or a special occasion or just a gift to yourself, support Take Back the Night through your purchase. So just also, so you had the 4 and one passed away from the car accident?
No. Annie survived. She had to go through years of rehabilitation. And we did lose a daughter in 2002 from an accidental overdose of drugs that she had gotten from her mother.
Oh, no.
So, I appreciate the question, but you have to know this is still emotional for me too.
Oh, of course. My goodness, all of this is so much, John, and I can hear it in your voice, and I'm sure our listeners, they're all struggling with different facets themselves, right? And some are parents, and so your grace and being on the podcast and sharing your own journey and how raw it still is just such a gift for all of us. So we're grateful.
Thank you so much. I did want to say that when my son came to me in 2020 and said, "Let's go back and look at this," you can imagine that it was actually very difficult because I'd kind of moved on, and I didn't really think there was much to be discovered. And that was a huge mistake because what we found was that her life and the impact and the others that we discovered who had been abused, it was like putting together a 100-piece puzzle, but only having to start with 5 pieces. And so we hired a forensic law firm who also had a former terrific FBI investigator. And we set about putting the puzzle back together to find out, really what had happened. And we had 4 objectives, and one was to restore Valarie's good name and repudiate the lies and the distortions told about her by her abusers. Second was to bring some justice and accountability to the abusers and those involved in the criminal cover-up. And the third was to enable the Clark family and the Miller families to find, some degree of emotional closure. And the fourth was to encourage other survivors to share their stories. And so we spent a year and a half, basically 2 years in this investigation. And I look back on it today and I just hardly can't believe it. So in the book, Hometown Betrayal, it's really broken into part 1 and part 2. Part 1 being the story of Valarie's abuse specifically, and then part 2, the investigation that led to the state of Utah issuing a very, very unique and never has happened in the past, a public apology to our family for what had happened.
Yeah, that's so that must have been. Was it written? Was it like how did the apology come forth?
Had to come about. Well,
Yeah.
it wasn't easy, and what we had, we'd completed the investigation, and it was if you look at a binder, it was about 6 inches deep, and we went to the state of Utah and through the attorney general here in Utah, and he assigned the case to his chief criminal and civil attorneys. And they went through our investigation and did their own investigation and concluded that it was accurate and they couldn't find any fault with it, and in fact agreed with it. But they then had to go to the Department of Public Safety, and because therein was really the ones that, or they were really the ones that needed to issue the apology. And that was more difficult because the cover-up was included in the cover-up in 1990 was the commissioner, who was the number one law enforcement person in the state. He was over the Department of Public Safety, and he was complicit in the cover-up because the highway patrolman and he were good friends and had associated together earlier in their career on a social basis. And so they struggled to issue the apology, but eventually they did. And in part, it was because we had filed a notice of claim that we intended to sue the state. This was in 2021 or 2022. And so the state had to make a decision whether they wanted to deal with a lawsuit that could, potentially be millions of dollars, or did they want an issue of public safety or a public apology?
Mm-hmm.
And so in the end, they chose the latter. We were very clear with them. We weren't after money, but we certainly expected an apology. And if they were willing to do that, then we would drop our notice of claim, which was basically a notice that you're going to file a lawsuit against them.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense now, John. You hate to think that that's what it will take to get people to do the right thing, but unfortunately, I think it happens all too often. People, I don't know how they live with themselves and, go on with such deception and lies and, bad things that have happened and can not feel like guilt-ridden every single night. But it's amazing to me, I guess, John, and listening to you, I was just thinking about those of us who go through trauma often suffer from terrible nightmares and terrible shame and terrible blame that gets, like your ex-wife having turned to substances, and like we have coping and we try.
Exactly.
And yet the abusers seem to have no conscience at all.
Or no consequences.
Yeah, yeah. They don't seem to be bothered by all the bad things they've done. It's crazy.
It's really crazy. And I guess for us as a family, it was certainly helped to bring this to light, because these two individuals had said terrible things about Valarie for many, many years, including that she was crazy and she was schizophrenic, and they claimed they had both taken lie detector tests, which we found out they hadn't, of course. Mm-hmm. And so it was really interesting. In fact, just before the call here today, I looked at a little quote in the book by Emily Benedict where she talked to Valerie's sister, and it says, Debbie called me 5 days after the press conference. That means she called the author, and said that while sitting in church that morning, she realized that the feeling of having a stone sitting on her heart that she'd carried for 30 years was finally gone. After the press conference, I felt uneasy, she told me, but back in the safety of her familiar church house, she realized the feeling was gone. I feel free, and it's a good feeling.
I'm glad you read that. John, it's Your book is, let's talk about that actually.
Okay, let's do it.
Now that you read a quote from it, it's going to get our listeners really excited to delve into it. And I know, maybe you can say, what should our listeners look for in terms of learning, not just about what happened with Valarie, but what do you think they'll garner in terms of survivorship?
Well, let me begin by saying that the book is not a happy story, and it doesn't have a happy ending. But there's great lessons to be learned from it in terms of having the courage to step forward. And it isn't even courage, because you know yourself, and having been a survivor, that for whatever reason, survivors heap upon themselves so much shame, which is so sad, because there's no reason for shame when someone takes another person's agency and abuses them. But I think what's been interesting with the writing of the publishing of the book is that we've had so many people write to us and make reviews of the book and had comments about how they were impacted and shared their stories, and it's been very gratifying in that sense. Maybe I could read a review or so you might find.
Sure, that'd be great.
I'll just read a couple. This was an Amazon reviewer. This book is essential as it exposes the often overlooked consequences of child sexual abuse and violence on child welfare, public health, and human rights. It is a crucial resource for colleges and universities to educate future leaders in social work, child protection, and human rights, offering a narrative that is rarely shared. That's one. There's another one that says, this is a poignant, beautifully written, devastating account of a young girl's horrendous abuse. The trauma that followed, as well as the subsequent cover-up by people in position of power, making the choice to lie and to protect the monsters that perpetrated such terrible crimes while in a position of power. Although it's a tough read, it's a must-read. The conversation needs to be had, and things still need to change. Start believing victims and stop protecting abusers. And this is very common of what the reviews have been.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for continuing to take the journey on the Dear Survivor podcast. A quick note, we are 100% volunteer at the podcast and at Take Back the Night. Your donations, your generosity helps us do what we do on such a shoestring budget. And we would be so grateful if this show is helping you through your journey and you are passing it along to others you care about. Please visit the Take Back the Night website and donate and support our cause and our mission to end sexual violence and support survivors. Thank you.
I might add, too, that Elizabeth Smart, who I know you've probably had her on your show for that matter, but you recall Elizabeth Smart, Katie, is that correct?
Of course, yeah.
She wrote your
opening, right, for the book?
She wrote the foreword to the book, and she so elegantly talked about the thing that we need to be doing is believing, that so many people either don't believe or don't want to believe or don't want to be involved. But Valarie was never believed. And I asked her after in talking to her one day, well, what's the difference between what you experienced and what Valarie experienced? And she was very quick to say, people believed me. Because, she was rescued by the police, and the whole country was looking for her for 9 months. There's no question what had happened. Valarie, many people didn't believe her because of the type of people that abused her and covered it up. And so we need to believe abuse victims. 95% of all abuse claims are true. So, and you know the statistics probably much better than I do, but that's the first thing, is we need to believe these stories, because as hard as they are, they're real. And an abuser's life is affected, and also the children and parents and siblings. It's a ripple effect. It's like dropping a pebble in a pond, and it just ripples out in so many directions for generations.
Absolutely, John. That's so beautifully said by you. And it's kind of the entire purpose of what we do at Take Back the Night. And I don't know if I think most of our listeners know, but just so you know how it impacts what you're doing and your late wife's legacy is there are, thousands and thousands of stories, and so many are met with disbelief and blame and cover up, just like Valarie's story. And it is, so courageous for someone like you to take this hard, when Ryan must have come to you, I can't imagine as a father, you like, oh no, I thought we were all good on this and I could just keep going. But by opening this wound back up, I think you're enabling a lot of survivors to, again, find another story that they can, relate to and be encouraged by your courage, right? So your courage gives them hope that even if the people around them are still in disbelief or without support, there are good men like you who are willing to do all this work to find justice. And your 4 goals for the book are so important, all of them. So, thank you for being such a good father and husband and working so hard on this. I can't imagine all the hard things you've been through, John, but it's such a good thing that you're doing with the book.
Well, thank you so much. And we've been pleasantly pleased by, the response to the book. And we're actually in the process of producing with a large podcast company a full season of the book or the story. So I think this is a story that's going to be told in a lot of different ways, and it has to help. May I share with you one other story?
Sure.
During the investigation, as I mentioned earlier on in the podcast, at the first rape of Valarie when she was 13 or 14, there was a third person that witnessed it. And we had, of course, lost track of whatever happened to him, but our investigation revealed that he had later, probably in the 2004 or 5 time frame, been arrested in Colorado for soliciting sex over the internet.
Oh, wow.
For a child. And he had actually gone to prison. And he spent 5 or 6 years in the Colorado State Prison, and then was released and moved back to Logan, Utah. And we actually followed him for 6 months. And we taped him grooming another young woman and the mother, who he was obviously grooming to have as a victim. And we reported him to the Colorado Parole Board, and they actually revoked his parole and put him back in prison. And we also discovered, which needed to happen, right? We don't want those kind of people in our society. So, but the other thing that happened is he had abused his granddaughter.
Oh, gosh.
And no one had picked that up in the police interviews by the police in Colorado. But our former FBI investigator noted that he had also abused his granddaughter. So we went to the Cache County attorney and brought this information to light, and they assigned an investigative team who went to the granddaughter. And she was 23 or 24 at that time, which had been a couple of years ago, and had a child. And she said, no one's ever come to me about this. And yes, he did abuse me over a long period of time. And she came forward. She agreed to work with the police. They filed felony charges. He was convicted and sentenced 5 years to life in Utah State Prison when he gets out of Colorado. But the remarkable thing about this is this young lady is how she began to flourish and take ownership of her life after having suffered for so many years the fact that she had been abused by a trusted grandfather. And she gave this elegant speech at the trial where she addressed her grandfather. It's in the book. It's a story of redemption. And,
Perfect.
And so these were some of the things that came out of the investigation that would have never happened had this investigation not taken place. And we actually, when we had the book launch, she came and spoke to the audience, which was probably 150 people, and gosh, she's doing so well, and she's an advocate now, and she wants to do more to help other survivors. And so that was one of many good stories or things that have happened since the book's been published in the investigation.
That's such great news, John. I think it's just that ripple effect that we hope for, is one thing will lead to another thing, will lead to another thing. And you'll never know yourself, John, like how many people you'll have touched with your book and being a guest on my podcast and the foundation. So let's finish up with what you're doing with the Generation All Foundation.
Well, thank you for asking about that. We've started a nonprofit called Generation All, and of course the name reflects on what we're trying to do, and that is provide access for healing to survivors of all ages, and also to provide support and resources to families of sexual abuse, such as parents and spouses and children. We know that the earlier that PTSD and trauma can be dealt with, the more effective the recovery is. And you may know this. One of my associates told me just a few weeks ago that the average age for a survivor to tell their story or to come out with their story is age 52.
Oh, wow.
And so we know that probably most stories don't come out. Would you agree with that?
Right. Most survivors still remain silent. If we think that there's 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men who have been through some form of abuse, sexual assault, or rape, that's got to be the case. That most are still silent.
So in our nonprofit, we're also going to focus on trying to intervene earlier, because when all these emotions and pain are trapped inside, and then you get on with life and having children, the pressures of daily life, this is when people begin to break down, which is the normal response of carrying all this emotional pain. And so we're going to really focus on trying to intervene earlier. And we can do this in a number of ways, but one area that we're looking very closely at now is by adapting screening for young kids with potentially ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences. You may be familiar with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we've been in contact with Dr. Nadine Harris in California, who has done so much in California, preparing doctors and clinicians. She's actually trained over 35,000 clinicians and doctors to screen young children and adolescents for adverse childhood conditions. And then you can begin to deal with it on an earlier basis before it becomes more permanently integrated into their psyche. So what we discovered, there's never enough for survivors, but there are many options in terms of groups out there and nonprofits and foundations that work in the survivor area, but there's very little being done for the generational abuse effect.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to bring together some important people and groups to focus on, the children and the grandchildren and the parents and siblings so that we can stop the generational impact of it.
That's fantastic, John. I don't know if there's anything else you want to share with our listeners, but certainly we'll put the book and the foundation in our show notes. Is there anything else you'd like to close out our conversation with?
No, just that we sure appreciate you and what you're doing. It's just terrific. And any way we can help and be part of this great cause, that's what we want to do in memory of Valarie, and
Mm-hmm.
that our own experience has broadened our understanding that this is an epidemic. It's almost it's a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do more.
Oh, thank you for saying that, John. I mean, I think I would conclude with thank you. I'm sorry that you come to this through personal experience, but I wish there were more men, especially those who've had such influence and success in the corporate world as you have, that could lend their talent to something that's not so lucrative, but really just healing and so important. At the end of the day, the growth national product is only so much behind the people and the pain we live through. So thank you for coming to this cause, even though it's through hardship of your own and your personal pain, but you're bringing it with grace and confidence and tons of diligence. I'm so proud of you. I wish we could clone all you're doing, John. Thank you.
You're very sweet, and God bless you for all the good work you're doing.
Oh, well, thank you. We'll keep going, the two of us.
You let me know if I can help in any way.
Yeah, so I'll just wrap up for our listeners. Thank you for continuing on this journey, not giving up, finding hope, and listening to more people out there who, have been through so much and still continue and still find strength. Together, we can thrive and survive, and we are never alone in our experience nor our healing journey. So continue onward, and until the next episode, take good care. Thank you again, everybody, for joining another episode of the Dear Katie podcast. I hope very much you found today's episode helpful, empowering, and a way to take another step in that long journey toward healing and supporting those we care about, learning about sexual violence prevention, and also survivor support. For those of you who don't know, again, the Take Back the Night website has tons of great resources, books, self-care options, cool merch. If you're feeling like you need a wearable, we have great t-shirts. Of course, we would love it if you follow along on our free newsletter with news and events going on around the country and even around the globe. And finally, don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You'll find our entire community popping up here and there, and recaps of our podcast episodes as well. So together we shatter the silence, and together we end the violence. Take care.